be showing you some quick tricks to help making a collage easier. So these tricks will work with a realistic sketch or an abstract sketch. I just happen to have a realistic sketch. I've already marked my layers. So the shapes that are the biggest, that are at the bottom, I put a number 1. The shapes that go on top of that are number 2. And then the very last shapes that are inside of the number 2 shapes are number 3. So when I get started on my project, I'm gonna start with those very first shapes, the shapes that are number 1. The first thing I want to show you is a couple of different ways for cutting out your shapes. So one thing you can do is just kind of eyeball it. Like you can look at your sketch. I can see here that I had a hill with like a curvy line. And I could sort of like put my paper that I want to cut it out of next to it and sort of kind of float my pencil over and kind of guess where I would want to cut. And then when I cut that out, it might not be exactly the same as this shape, but it would be pretty close. So I would cut on that line and then I could glue it right onto my paper. Another option is if you don't really want to just guess, if you really like the way one of your shapes looks in your sketch, like I really love how this flower turned out, you can actually cut your sketch apart. This sketch is a tool, and I'm noticing it's hard for me to cut this little flower when it's part of the big sheet. So I'm just gonna make my life a little easier and kind of start by chunky cutting it out. Because this sketch is a tool, we don't have to keep it looking perfect. We can cut it up and use it in order to make our final artwork. So I'm basically cutting out like a template or a stencil. And the more I take my time cutting on those lines really carefully, the happier I will probably be with the finished product. Then when I have my template or my stencil cut out, what I would want to do next is find the paper that I would like to use to cut that shape out. And instead of drawing on the front, because that's going to show when we glue the pieces down, I would flip it over. And remember, we don't want to trace right in the middle of a piece of paper. We always want to use the edges first, and then that way the rest of the paper will be good for other people to use. If I were to cut right into the middle, I kind of ruin this whole big paper for somebody else. So I'm gonna put my little stencil right in the corner, and I would just hold it carefully and trace around. And if I wanted to make multiple of these, I could just keep going, kind of setting them side by side so I'm not wasting a lot of paper. And then once I had them traced, I would just cut them out of this paper. There are a couple of different ways to glue your cutout pieces of paper onto your big final paper. And the choice that you make is gonna really depend on the size of the paper. So for a bigger piece of paper, the easiest way to do it is with a glue stick. And if you're using a glue stick, you wanna make sure that you also get a piece of practice paper. And that paper will probably have like either typing or drawing on the back. It's just a good way to make sure that you don't get glue on the table. So when you're looking at the paper kind of laid out the way that you want it to be, you're just gonna flip it over onto the practice paper. And then I would suggest doing glue around the outline of the shape first, just because you want to make sure you get glue all the way to the edge. So do the outline first, and then, especially when it's a big piece, it's really worth taking the time and getting glue over every single part of your paper. You can be pretty generous with it. If it starts to run out, like I've used up all of the glue right there, I'm just gonna turn it a little bit. I'm not gonna turn it a lot because that's gonna cause a big mess. So just make it go up a little bit, and then once you use it up again, you can turn it back up again. Getting glue all over it is gonna make sure that you don't have any flippy floppies, and it's gonna make sure that it doesn't wrinkle as easily. All right, now that I have glue onto my paper, I'm gonna kind of line it up by floating it down. So I'm gonna hold it above my paper, and then it helps to stand up while you're doing this. I'm gonna kind of line up the corners first, is an easy way. If you have it touching something else, line up that part first, and then don't push it down, right? Once you've got it lined up, let it go. So it's kind of, let me show you. It's kind of like floating on top still, right? I haven't pushed it all the way down. Now that I've got it in the right spot, I'm gonna put my hands together, and using this part of my hand, that soft, smooth part of my hand, I'm just gonna smooth it out from the middle. So if I start in the middle and then smooth it out, that's gonna help me make sure that I don't get any like wrinkles or tears as I'm gluing it down. If you're gluing a little piece of paper, it's gonna be a lot easier to do that with a glue brush and the cup of glue instead of the glue stick. The glue stick can get kind of frustrating and messy with smaller pieces of paper. So what you're gonna do is turn your paper over to the back, and then you're just gonna open up the glue cup, and you're gonna dip your glue brush into the glue, and there are gonna be little drips coming off of the bottom. Do not wipe those drips on the top of the glue cup or on the side of the glue cup, because then when you go to close it, if there's glue here or here, it's gonna glue the lid on, and that is gonna be sad. So what we're gonna do instead is we're gonna wipe our drips off on the inside of the cup. I'm just kind of tapping my brush right on the inside of the glue cup. And then I can put little dots of glue onto my paper. You want to make sure you get a good amount for each dot. If you start to run out, you can always dip your brush back into the glue. And when you're not using the brush, you can absolutely set it onto the plate. That is what the plate is there for. It can get dirty, it can get glue on it. And then you're just gonna figure out where you want to put that little piece of paper. I want to show you what to do if you ever accidentally don't put enough glue onto one of your pieces. So this is going to be the roof of my house. I check to make sure I know where it goes. I'm going to flip it over to the back, and now I'm going to purposefully make a mistake, and I'm going to not put glue over the whole thing. So I'm getting glue on the bottom really well, but I haven't gotten the top of this triangle. And I'm gonna glue it onto my artwork. I'd like for it to overlap a little bit. And then I can push it down. And when you're done gluing all of your pieces, you're gonna check for flippy flappies by folding your paper and then looking to see which pieces of paper pop off. So I've glued everything else pretty flat because it's not popping off, but I can see there's a flippy flappy right there where the triangle isn't glued down all the way. And the easiest way to fix that is to get some glue on my glue brush. Remember, I'm gonna get the drips off by touching it to the inside of the cup, and then I'm just gonna lift up that piece that has a flippy flappy, and I'm gonna paint glue onto the part of my shape that didn't have enough. And then I'll be able to just smooth it down, and we are ready to go. The very last step step of your collage you have to do after your artwork has dried completely overnight. So you're going to glue down all of the shapes one day, and then the next day, after it's had a whole night to dry completely, you have the option of adding details with other art supplies. You could use Sharpies, you could use oil pastels or crayons. The reason it's so important to let your artwork dry all the way is because if your paper is wet and you go to draw on top of it, it's gonna tear the paper, and it could get glue onto the art supplies and ruin the art supplies. So we want to take care of your art, and we want to take care of our Sharpies and wait until everything is completely dry. You can use metallic Sharpies to add details onto your artwork. These kind of details would be good to do like lines or dots or anything that's too small to cut out of paper. Sometimes these metallic Sharpies can dry out, so if it's not looking bright and shiny, go ahead and bring it to your teacher. I can switch it out for a better version. Have fun adding in your very last details and final touches, and I hope you enjoyed making a collage.